The conception of social structure that Durkheim lays out in his Rules of Sociological Method occupies the opposite pole to the conception of Weber prescribes in economy and society. Durkheim affirms that social structures exist as things emergent from social action, which he calls social facts, which constitute the distinctive and proper object of study for sociology as a science, he says. Sociological method, as we practice it, rests wholly on the basic principle that social facts must be studied as things, that is, as realities external to the individual. If no reality exists outside of the individual consciousness, sociology whole lacks any material of its own. End of quote. A social fact is any way of acting, fixed or not, capable of exerting over the individual an external constraint, without having the specific concept of emergence at his disposal. Durkheim heralds it by stating that society has a reality sui generis, literally a reality of its own kind, and illustrating this reality by analogy to the difference between a living organism and the chemical substances of which it is composed. Echoing Spencer, Durkheim observes that whenever elements of any kind combine, by virtue of this combination, they give rise to new phenomena. One is therefore forced to conceive of these phenomena as residing not in the elements but in the entity formed by the union of these elements. The living cell contains nothing save chemical particles, just as society is made up of nothing except individuals. Yet it is very clearly impossible for the characteristic phenomena of life to reside in atoms of hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen. Life cannot be split up in this fashion. It is one and consequently cannot be located save in the living substance in its entirety. It is in the whole and not in the parts. End of quote. And says Durkheim, so too with society, which exists as a whole and not in its parts. Social facts have an existence independent of their individual manifestations. They must therefore be considered in themselves, detached from the conscious beings who form their own mental representations of them. They must be studied from the outside as external things, and in particular, the determining cause of a social fact must be sought among antecedent social facts and not among the states of individual consciousness. According to uncompromising precepts of the rules of sociological method, causation runs downward and not upward. Social facts constrain individuals, but individuals do not constrain social facts through the exercise of their own agency. At times, in his other writings, Durkheim ever celebrates the insignificance of the individual in the face of the godlike immensity and determining force of society. The particular social facts in a society combine to form an integrated whole, which is society. Like Spencer before and persons after him, Durkheim treated the parts of society as interdependent and complementary in the manner of the organs of a living body. Although Durkheim's distinction between mechanical and organic solidarity might seem to imply that only modern societies with a complex division of labor are organic, this distinction is situated within a generally functionalist conception of society and an evolutionary model similar to Spencer's, in which differing species of social organism evolve from lower to higher orders of complex functional differentiation. So, for instance, Durkheim asks, what function is served by the division of labor itself? Elsewhere, he argues that the state is the very organ of social thought and the organ of moral discipline, the proper function of which is to preserve in calling the individual to a moral way of life, and in conceptualizing the difference between normal and pathological. Durkheim firstly makes clear that these terms refer to between normal and pathological. Durkheim firstly makes clear that these terms refer to the health and morbidity of societies as distinct from that of individuals, and secondly asserts that different species of societies, like different species of biological organisms, have different functional needs, so that what is normal for one species of society might be pathological for another, and vice versa. By opposing normal to pathological, Durkheim equates normal with healthy, and he affirms that the task of sociology is precisely to diagnose ills in the social body and prescribe remedies for them. This brings us to Durkheim's conception of morality. In contrast to Weber, who claimed that there could be no scientific answers to moral questions, Durkheim strongly affirmed that there could. Yet, because what we propose to study is above all reality, it does not follow that we should give up the idea of improving it. We would esteem our research not worth the labor of a single hour if its interest were merely speculative. A state of moral health exists that science alone can competently determine, and as it is nowhere wholly attained, it is already an ideal to strive towards it. End of quote. The possibility of answering moral questions scientifically ensues from Durkheim's conception of morality as a social fact. In Rules of the Sociological Method, he defines as moral any precept whose violation is condemned by public opinion or by widespread repressive sanction, saying that whenever we are confronted with a fact that presents this characteristic, we have no right to deny its moral character, for this is proof that it is of the same nature as other moral facts. End of quote. In Professional Ethics and Civic Morals, he reaffirms this formalism by defining moral facts as rules of conduct that have sanction. In Moral Education, he characterizes morality in terms of rules that are customary, hence socially instituted, but that are authoritative, that individuals do not feel free to alter according to their own interests or tastes. The authority of morality comes from outside of individuals, but not from outside the natural universe. Rather, it comes from society as a supra-individual entity existing within the natural universe. And in the division of labor in society, Durkheim argues that the ultimate function of morality is social solidarity. He says, we must say that which is moral, is everything that is a source of solidarity, everything that forces man to take account of other people, to regulate his actions by something other than the promptings of his own egoism. And the more numerous and strong these ties are, the more solid is the morality. Or again, moral goals, then, are those the object of which is society. To act morally is to act in terms of the collective interest, above and beyond me as a conscious being, above and beyond those sentient beings who are other individual human beings. There is nothing else save that sentient being that is society. By this I mean anything that is a human group, the family as well as the nation and humanity, at least to the extent that they constitute societies. End of quote. Morality for Durkheim is not any specific set of values or rules, but a type of rule. Moral facts are recognizable by their form, not their content. This allows us to investigate actual moral practices in a non-ethnocentric way. Whenever we encounter a social fact that has the form of morality, we must study it as such, even if its content seems abhorrent to us. Durkheim's conception of morality is socially relative in an entirely different way than Weber's. For Weber, there are scientific answers to the question, what do social actors consider morally right and wrong, but not to the question, what should social actors consider morally right and wrong? Because morality is relative to individual subjectively meaningful action. For Durkheim, there are scientific answers to this latter question, but they vary from one species of society to the next. This is because they are relative to the objective determinants of solidarity in each social organism, the factors that, in their objective consequences, promote or detract from the integration of the interdependent social facts that make up that society. Every people has its moral code that is determined by the conditions under which it is living. Moral questions can have objective scientific answers, but these answers will be culture-bound. However, this relativistic tendency is mitigated by the teleological quality of Durkheim's conception of evolution. Saint-Simon postulated that the evolution of societies was linear from the simple, local, and small-scale units of family and tribe through the present condition of nation-state societies to an eventual global society, the outlines of which he believed he could already discern in European internationalism. Durkheim's linear arrangement of types of solidarity, from the horde to mechanical and then to organic solidarity, follows a similar arc, and echoed Saint-Simon in arguing that contemporary national patriotism served as an evolutionary stepping stone to a more universal human patriotism, proper to a world society. This teleological evolutionary organicism implies a future-oriented moral universalism in which the moral norms or different species of society can be judged to be closer to or further away from the culmination of social evolution in a universal human solidarity. Against this backdrop, we can understand the debate over Durkheim's allegedly conservative or progressive tendencies. In the context of his own society, Durkheim was in many ways a progressive, secularist, cosmopolitan, a Dreyfusard. His progressive stances cohere with his sociological conviction that moral and political individualism, the cult of the individual, is itself a social fact produced by the increasingly complex division of labor in society. If individuals perceive themselves as independent agents and act accordingly, a social fact makes this possible. As for rights, the reason why the individual has more or fewer rights, certain rights and not others, is not that he is constituted in a particular way. It is because society attributes this or that importance to him and attaches a higher or lower value to what concerns him. Durkheim favored rights because, and to the extent that, the increasing division of labor and the demands of organic solidarity make respect for the freedom and dignity of individuals appropriate and necessary to the normal functioning of modern society. On the other hand, Durkheim's criteria of normalcy and pathology have an implicit conservative tendency in their tendency to valorize the status quo. Durkheim proposes that a social fact must be recognized as normal, either if it is common to all members of the species of social organism in which it is found, or alternatively and equivalently if it is grounded in the nature of that organism. By this criteria, the genocidal massacre that was a routine feature of Spanish colonization in the Americas in the early 17th century, or the depredations of the transatlantic slave trade in the late 18th century might well qualify as normal, and the activism of figures like Bartholomew de las Casas and Olaudah Equiano as pathological. Likewise, if contemporary Chinese society is taken as belonging a different species of social organism than Western liberal democracies, the Tiananmen Square protests of 1989 might well count as pathological for that society. When a given practice is normalized and an integral part of the order of things, a Durkheimian sociological justification for dissent requires showing that the organic constitution of society is changing so as to make existing functional structures obsolete, and oppositional activity the first forms of a new order in the making. This is a higher burden of proof than the converse. Does this mean that Durkheim morally approves of any social order capable of establishing solidarity among its members? Does his work express no preference between, for instance, the American and the Chinese solution to the challenges of modernization? The answer is yes and no. Durkheim's own progressive commitments on the one hand, and his formal prescription for the science of morality fit hand in gloves as long as it remains empirically plausible that an advancing division of labor necessarily makes moral individualism the optimum basis for social solidarity. They part ways if we suppose that moral solidarity may take a variety of forms within the same economic structure. Between multiple alternative models for the future development of society, each of which succeeds in establishing its own organic integration, Durkheim's sociology provides us with no means of adjudicating. This sort of indeterminacy, however, would be out of place within Durkheim's holist epistemic strategy. For the whole to explain the parts reliably, one must assume that the interaction of the parts tends automatically to one particular outcome, in which the properties of the parts are aligned with the needs of the whole. Durkheim assumed that human nature was highly socially malleable. On the one hand, individuals are incapable of limiting their own desires without externally imposed social constraints. Without these constraints, individuals cannot satisfy their desires and therefore cannot be happy. On the other hand, individuals experience happiness relative to the constraints and opportunities of their society, so that the savages are as content with their lot as we can be with our own. Therefore, in a healthy society, human happiness is adapted to the moral duties made necessary by the social organism. A holist theory like Durkheim's can criticize society for not having effective moral norms adequate to the practical independency fostered by its division of labor. It cannot criticize society on the grounds that the very principle of its integration is somehow pathological. For this criticism to be possible, one must be able to imagine an irreconcilable contradiction between the demands of society and the fulfillment of human happiness. Such a contradiction could be argued on the basis of a pre-social human nature which goes unfulfilled in the current form of society. However, arguments from human nature are difficult even to entertain if one accepts the strong claims of emergence found in holist epistemic strategies. More troubling to a sociologist of the Durkheimian persuasion is the contention that the social order contradicts itself, that it systematically imbues its members with imperatives, which it ensures they cannot fulfill. Just this sort of contradiction is at the heart of Marx's sociology and his hierarchical epistemic strategy.